Yeah, perfect segue to our next guest, which is the Hub's editor-in-chief for business and economics, Theo Argyris, who had a terrific column today in the Hub talking, Theo, about exactly this, the extent to which tariffs and countervailing duties and the revenues that are going to flow off this are now, Theo, in your view, becoming increasingly kind of hardwired into what's been a pretty big spending bonanza this week, tax expenditures, announcements from both parties. So why don't you unpack your core argument for our audience?
Yeah, next week we're going to get. Good morning, guys. Next week we're going to get obviously some important announcements from the Trump administration on tariffs. On multiple fronts. What he's going to do with the existing tariffs that exist that he already has imposed on Canada, and whether he's going to impose new ones. And that will probably trigger, more formally a response from the Canadian government, which, as I note in the story, but also, I mean, I've seen on social media how the Canadian government has these advertisements in the U.S. on how tariff is a tax and trying to
Yeah,
kind of illustrate,
it's
underscore
a tax
how
here in Canada
the
too.
U.S. the U.S. tariffs are imposing a tax on Americans. Well, the response will essentially be that, which is quite an extraordinary thing to do, which is to impose taxes on households mid election campaign. I don't know if we've ever been in that situation before. And my point in the article essentially is that there are plenty of risks associated with relying too much on tariffs. And Sean talked about the political incentives, but we don't want to be the political incentives of kind of having a very aggressive pushback vis-a-vis Trump. My concern is that we will also have fiscal incentives to push back aggressively on Trump. And there will be this kind of weird situation where the harder they push in terms of actual concrete retaliatory tariffs, the more they'll have in their campaign war chest. And that poses a number of risks. One is the fact that the truth is we don't really know what our tariff regime will look like in, let's say, 5, 6, 7 months,
Yeah.
because not only is Trump kind of notoriously kind of willing to kind of move back on things that he does, reverse measures, but also we really haven't had a debate even in Canada on what
Hmm.
retaliatory tariffs should look like, what the strategy here. I think it's been more emotional than really intellectual type of debate. So that's kind of the one thing we don't really want to spend money that we don't really know we'll have in a few months from now. The
Theo,
other one,
I
the
just
other
want to bring Sean into this because Sean, there's something quite magical about tariffs, and Theo brings it up wonderfully in his piece. Is that it's a kind of way to tax people, but make them really excited about getting hit with a tax. It's wild, and I think it's part of the reason. It's part of the kind of genius, actually, of what Trump is doing, and he's increasingly linking these tariffs to generating revenue to pay for the big tax cuts that he wants to get through Congress. And now, in a similar way, our parties are thinking, wow, we got billions of dollars here that are potentially flowing in. And I guess whenever they decide to release their costed campaign platforms, they're going to allocate that tariff money to, as Theo said, paper up the cracks here on what would be a bonanza of government spending funded in effect by a tax hike.
Yeah, Roger, we're so glad to have Theo on the team, and his piece today is precisely the reason why. We've been worried for some time, Roger, that the Canadian government, that Canadian politicians weren't merely thinking about retaliatory tariffs through the lens of trade policy, that they couldn't resist the temptation to also see retaliatory tariffs as part of their fiscal policy. Just in this past week alone, we've seen major expenditures announced by the different parties. Theo estimates that the conservative tax cut, for instance, represents something north of $14 billion in foregone revenue. On the other hand, the two major parties have also nodded in the direction of a balanced budget And so it prompts the question, how do you hold all these things together? And I worry, as Theo said in his piece today, the answer is going to be retaliatory tariffs. The problem, of course, is by definition, the purpose of retaliatory tariffs isn't to generate revenue, it's to induce a settlement with the United States so we can get back to relatively free access to the American market. And so you worry if it becomes the foundation of the next government's fiscal plans, if it pushes against the interests of the country, which are ultimately to get back to tariff-free trade. I think this is an important contribution to the public policy debate from Theo, and I hope that people are paying close attention to it, because, as you say, whenever these costed platforms come out, if at the bottom, before you get the final budgetary balance, there's a significant tariff line, you know really what's going on here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come on,
and we're
come on
talking
to that, Theo.
about a lot of money. Just the proposed $155 billion worth of tariffs that have already been proposed, which are not dollar for dollar, could be raising and as much as $30 billion annually or more in
That's like
additional revenue.
that's like, just to put that in perspective, Roger. That's something like the equivalent of 3 percentage points on the GST. That's in the grand scheme of things, that's real revenue for the government of Canada.
But Theo, I mean, at a very moment where we're going to have an economic shock, potential job losses, I just don't understand this, because wouldn't economic policies be there to lower taxes, whether delivered through the income tax system or through sales taxes or through tariffs, because you want the economy to try to chug along to the best it can, because you're not, in a sense, placing a burden on especially on the consumer, which is really important in the Canadian economy.
Yeah, which is why we actually really do need to have a debate in this country about, what is the best way to respond. And I don't know if we're going to have it in the middle of an election campaign, but there's a number of reasons why you could argue that you need retaliatory tariffs. One is deterrence. Hoping maybe that the Americans have a lower tolerance of economic pain for these sorts of trade wars, because we know we're not going to win a trade war with the U.S., but maybe they have a lower tolerance for it. Or it could be to raise tariff walls around Canada. You had Mark Carney yesterday kind of, articulating in a way almost like a very nationalistic approach. Maybe that's kind of mimicking the American kind of rationale, or it is to raise revenue. But let's have an honest debate about what we're doing. And if it is about raising revenue, there are actually much better ways to raise revenue than tariffs, because the truth is tariffs are incredibly regressive taxation.
Except politically, though, right? Theo, which is Rudyard's point. Like, one of the reasons the Harper's reduction of the GST had so much political salience was because of its visibility, right, Rudyard? Every time someone buys something, they can see the sales tax they're paying. Incidentally, it's the same, one of the reasons the carbon tax has been so unpopular. From the matter of politics, what makes tariffs an attractive source of revenue is not just that you can gussy them up in the name of patriotism, as you said, is that they are highly invisible. How they go through the price system is unclear. And so, in hindsight, we should have thought of this, that the trade war caused by Trump is handing Canadian politicians across all parties, it must be said, this revenue source to essentially hold their fiscal plans together that no one quite understands, no one quite knows who's paying what, but that is, as Theo says, could, at least in the short term, generate significant revenue windfalls for the government of Canada.
Theo, let's give you the last word in this section. What is your bet as to how this plays out? Knowing how Ottawa works after an election, do you think there's an opportunity for cooler heads to prevail here and potentially retaliatory tariffs to come off? Because precisely they are a tax on us. I mean, they're just making the inflationary effects of tariffs worse.
Yeah. Interestingly, you had Ian Bremmer from Eurasia Group yesterday put out a note predicting that the next Canadian government will fold quietly, he said, after the election, which just kind of reflects really an economic reality that we have been trading with the Americans for a very, very long time. We haven't really been very successful of trading with anyone else. The pain of a trade war or trade walls, tariff walls, is going to be very, very. It's going to be very large kind of economic impact, primarily in Eastern Canada. And even we're in the middle of an election campaign now, and national sentiment is extremely elevated. But when when the bills come,
Yes.
and we have to think about kind of how much we really want to sacrifice, maybe cooler heads will prevail.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Theo. I'm just so proud of the team here. Look at this, the three amigos.
Yeah.
What Theo? You're an economic. What free trade conference was that? The three or four amigos? I forget. I was always the three, wasn't it?
Oh, the three amigos. It was the Canada, U.S., Mexico kind of
Yeah,
summit
yeah.
that I'm not sure when they
Boy,
ended those, but
those seem like different days, eh? I think it was George, the original Bush in a sombrero with
Yes.
whoever it was. It wasn't Vicente Fox. I'll have to remember. Look, guys, thank you so much. And Theo, thanks for the great reporting. Urge viewers and listeners to check it out right now at the Hub. You get Theo Argytas exclusively at the Hub for all of our best economics and business insight. Sean, I'm going to say goodbye and sayonara for this edition of Election 2025. Friday, we made it through the week.
Yes,
We'll kick
yes,
it all off
yes.
again on Monday mornings at 10 a.m. So we'll say goodbye to Theo now. We'll say goodbye to our audio listeners. But if you want to stick around on the live stream for a couple more minutes, Sean and I will be taking questions from the live chat. So we'll say that goodbye now. Bye-bye.